Hi everyone. It seems like a long time since I've seen you all in assembly or been able to talk to you, so I'm really looking forward to sharing some information about how you learn this morning. Have you ever thought about what your teachers do when you're not in school? Have you thought about what they do when they come in early or they're still here till late in the evening? Well, they're busy planning what they're going to teach you next. And they're really thinking about what you already know and what you remember, so they can help you link your learning together. Because inside your brain are lots of neural pathways, and they all link together every time you learn something new, and that's called a schema. So all of that information that's around you every day and you're learning about, perhaps stuff you're watching on TV, you're reading about in your books, you're learning about in your classes, all goes into the schema in your brain. So I thought today I would tell you a little bit more about that. When we're learning in school, there's probably always three key questions that your teachers are asking you to think about. And you're thinking, when you're learning something new, where am I going? How well am I doing? And how can I achieve my goals? How will I get there? Because what we already know helps us learn new information. And the more new information we learn, the more we can learn even more. So it all fits together really well. It's like a whole load of post-it notes in your mind. Every time you learn something new, that's sticking into your brain. And sometimes your teacher might call that sticky knowledge. So it's when you've learned something and it's going to stick in your brain. And it's usually connected to something you already know, because the more you know, the more you can learn. And that's how our brains work. Sometimes we learn so much new stuff that we forget what we've learned. And that's because our brain is split into two memories. You have your short-term memory and your long-term memory. So all of your new learning goes into your short-term memory, and you have to learn that and you have to remember that time and time again so that it can transfer into your long-term memory. So this is really interesting. So it says that after 1 hour, roughly 56% of the information you've learnt, you've forgotten. Nearly half the information that you've learnt, you forget within an hour. And then after 1 day, 66% of that information you've forgotten. So that's nearly 2/3 of that information you've forgotten. And after 6 days, so nearly a week, you have forgotten nearly all of the information you've learned. You've just remembered a quarter of it, 25%. But that's where teachers do their job really well, because they help you remember. So every time they help you remember something, they are helping it become sticky in your brain, sticky knowledge, and it's hooking on to that learning that you've got so it can transfer from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. I wonder if you can think about some things your teacher has done to help you remember things. Tell the person sitting next to you. Your teacher might want to pause the video. So we are learning knowledge and we're learning skills, and the two things balance each other out, because the more knowledge we have, the more skills we can perform. The more skills we can perform, the more knowledge we know. So I want you to have a think now. I want you to think about something that you've learned today. I know my slide says this week there, that's a mistake, isn't it? So I want you to think about something you've learned today. Okay, and I want you to think, what was it connected to? What did you already need to know to be able to do that thing? So maybe you were learning something new in maths, maybe a new calculation, but you needed to use your times table knowledge, for instance. Or maybe you were learning something in art. You were doing a technique with a paintbrush, but you needed to know about light and dark shades or primary colours, for instance. Because usually we don't learn things brand new. We always connect to something we've learnt before. So I want you to think of something you've learnt today, something you learnt last week, and can you remember back to something you learnt last year? And I want you to think really hard about what it was that you connected that to help you remember. So tell the person sitting next to you something you've learnt this week, something you learnt last week, and something you learnt last year. And what was it that you had to know to be able to perform that skill, to do that thing, to learn that knowledge? You might want to pause the video now. Okay, I'm sure you had lots of good ideas, and you were probably thinking about things that you've read in English that's helped you in your history work. You might have thought about things you'd learned in maths, for instance, when you're looking at data and graphs and tables and how that's helped you in science work. I'm sure you could think of lots and lots of examples. I want you to think now about, how did your teacher help you remember those things? What sorts of things do they do in class? Perhaps put your hand up and tell your teacher, what do they do to help you? Okay, so some of you might have thought, well, when we go into the learning pit, that helps us remember because we make mistakes, we try things out, and actually the harder we have to grapple with an idea or we have to think of an idea, then the more we remember it because we come out of the learning pit. So that's something your teacher might use. Some of you might have thought about some quizzes. I'm sure some of you do quizzes in your classroom when your class teacher is asking you questions about the things you've learnt in geography or history or science. That helps you remember. So remember that the more we learn, we forget over a day or over a week, but every time we remember it, we're going to remember a bit more. I've put some pictures up there of knowledge organisers because I think they help me remember things, particularly if I'm learning a new learning challenge and I want to think about the new vocabulary that I've learned or the skills that I've learned or where maybe something fits in history. I can use my knowledge organiser to help me organise my thoughts. Maybe you thought of some other ideas. You can let me know if you see me. So this is what's happening inside our brains. It's all of that information is coming together in this big web in our neuro pathways, and they're all joining together because we're connecting everything that we know. So there might be things you're doing in science around plants, and you'll be connecting that to the plants that grow in your garden, or when you looked at plants in our garden with Ellie, or when you looked at plants at home, or what you've seen when you've been walking around. We're trying to make sense of the world around us through learning things, and it's connecting in our schema, in our brains. It's like a big spider web. So there might be things that you learn in history that link to things that you learned in history last year, or there might be things that you learn in geography about the world around us that you might have heard about in a story that you'd read in English. So thinking about that web that links together of all that knowledge in your head, that sticky knowledge, our schema. So I've told you quite a lot this morning. I've told you about the schema in your head, how it all links together. I've told you about how you forget things after an hour or a week. I've told you about your short-term memory and your long-term memory and how you have to do it lots and lots of times in your short-term memory for it to go in your long-term memory for you to remember. But the important thing is about how we are balancing our skills and knowledge. So I'm going to go back to that question earlier. So think of something you learnt this week, last week and last year. What was it connected to? And what did you need to know and remember to be able to do it? So same questions I asked you before, but I'm asking you to do it again. And this time I want you to think of something different. Tell the person sitting next to you, or put your hand up and tell your teacher. Okay, now I want you to look around. Look around your classroom. What can you see on the walls? I'm sure you might be able to see some of your working walls and the things that you've been working on in class. That's something your teacher does to help you remember. I'm sure you might be able to see some work in your books. You might be able to see your curriculum books. You might be able to see the book that you're reading in guided reading or in story time. And all of those things that are helping you make connections of all of the things that you're learning. So today, as you go throughout your day, every time your teacher tells you something that you think's new, I want you to think, what do I already know? Which means I can do this. And then tomorrow I want you to do the same. What did I learn yesterday that's helping me do my learning today? And I want you to think about that web, that schema that's growing inside your head every time you learn something. Because the more you learn, the more you can do, the more that you will remember. Okay, that's it from me today. And I can't wait to come around and look in your classrooms to see what you are learning. It's really important to me to find out how much you are learning and how much you are enjoying your time in school. So you'll see me popping in and out of your classrooms. And this week in particular, I'm going to be thinking about your reading. So I'm going to be looking at the books that you're reading and thinking about how that connects with your other learning. Because I like to know that we're all growing our schema because it never stops growing. That web in our head always keeps growing and growing and growing, all the connections that we've had. So enjoy your day, enjoy your week, and remember, start thinking, what do I know that's helped me remember my learning today? I hope you all have a fab day and I will see you soon.